National Prayer Breakfast.
Let us always give thanks for the miracle of life.
President Trump addresses a crowd of faith leaders and lawmakers. What he said about the fight for the unborn. Pro-life protests. Demonstrators gather in Richmond to demand the resignation of Virginia's governor over his remarks regarding abortion. We're at the state capitol. Outreach to Islam. Why the Pope's recent trip to the Arabian Peninsula was unlike any in recent memory. And ending human trafficking. Pope Francis releases his prayer intention for February. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, February 7th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. I will never let you down. That's what President Trump told the crowd at today's National Prayer Breakfast. He recognized Muslim, Jewish, and Christian attendees. The president also voicing his support for faith-based organizations that critics say are discriminating against same-sex couples. White House correspondent Mark Irons has more. Mark?
Wyatt, President Trump is the 12th president to speak at the annual prayer breakfast. He used his platform today to fight for Catholic Charities' adoption policies while continuing his defense of unborn children.
We must build a culture that cherishes the dignity and sanctity of innocent human life.
President Trump defending life at the National Prayer Breakfast, an annual bipartisan tradition in Washington.
All children, born and unborn, are made in the holy image of God.
He also voiced support for faith-based adoption agencies, including St. Vincent Catholic Charities in Michigan, sued by the ACLU last year for refusing to place children for adoption with same-sex couples.
My administration is working to ensure that faith-based adoption agencies are able to help vulnerable children find their forever families while following their deeply held beliefs.
But criticism this week came from Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar.
Religious freedom means that you don't use your faith to discriminate against others.
And the ACLU argues the policy of agencies like the Michigan Catholic Charities reduces placement options for the most vulnerable children. But St. Vincent's legal counsel says the arguments don't hold up, and the faith-based organization isn't discriminating against same-sex couples.
In Michigan, whenever an individual or a couple comes to them that they're not able to provide these services to, they'll give them a list of the dozens of other agencies in the area who can help them.
Before leaving today's prayer breakfast, the president received bipartisan prayers from Republican Senator James Langford and Democratic Senator Chris Coons, who asked for wisdom and peace for the president and his family. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. President Trump accuses Democrats of, quote, killing the great state of Virginia. The top three lawmakers there each is fighting a political scandal. Governor Ralph Northam is still facing fallout over a racist photo in his 1984 medical school yearbook page. Attorney General Mark Herring acknowledges wearing brown makeup and a wig at a college party in 1980. And Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax has been accused of sexual assault, though he denies that claim. Today, pro-lifers in the state are putting more pressure on the embattled governor over his support for a pro-abortion bill. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvey hears from the voices standing up for the voiceless in Richmond, Virginia.
They took time off work and school to remember kids who aren't here.
Our school is really pro-life, and we've been taught being pro-life, and we just believe that all humans have the right to life, no matter how old they are, if they're in the womb still.
We look at the scriptures, and it talks about how whenever the baby is in the mother's womb, the Lord knew that baby.
They stand up at the state capitol after Virginia Delegate Kathy Tran introduced a bill that would have allowed abortion up to birth.
My bill would allow that, yes.
Virginia Governor Ralph Northam supported the now-failed bill.
The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mothers.
Those words led to national outrage.
I think this is a triumph out of tragedy. We become a laughingstock around the nation, but quite frankly, it's started to stir a movement, not just in Virginia, but I think nationwide, that life matters, and that we're not going to allow politicians to write laws that amount to government legislative murder.
Bill Stanley and his fellow Republicans hold a 2-seat majority in the state Senate, and Democrats have been gaining seats in recent years. But pro-lifers in Virginia are focusing their attention on this issue.
We're living in a time that is unbelievable, and people to just kind of yawn at it and not realize the seriousness of it. If you're a Christian, this issue ought to trouble you to your core.
This is an election year here in Virginia. Every single state Senate seat, every single House of Delegates seats up for grabs this fall. And pro-lifers are hoping this enthusiasm will continue to motivate people to vote pro-life this fall. Here in Richmond at the state capitol, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
And our thanks to Jason Calvi for that report. At the U.S. Capitol, pro-life lawmakers fail in their attempt to force an immediate vote on a bill to protect children who survive an abortion.
I would urge the Speaker and the Majority Leader to schedule the Born Alive bill immediately so we can stand up and protect the sanctity of human life.
Representative Steve Scalise today requesting unanimous consent for the House to vote on the bill. Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy failed in the same move yesterday. Democrats control the floor and haven't cleared the proposal for a vote. A judge rules against the Diocese of Brownsville, who are fighting to keep the government from building a possible border wall on the property of a historic South Texas chapel. The ruling means the government is allowed to survey the land as a potential location. Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar told us it's the wrong decision.
So I'm saying, why do we have to put a barrier on half a mile? We can do that through personnel, technology, and if Border Patrol can't control half a mile, when they say we have to have a mile of fencing, then I think they got some issues there.
Cuellar spoke to our Jason Calvi Tuesday night about the La Lomita Chapel and how a border wall would impact the Catholic community who come from both sides of the border to pray. The pastor of the chapel says he will continue to fight federal efforts to build a wall.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor.
The Senate Judiciary Committee approves President Trump's pick for Attorney General. William Barr's nomination is approved along party lines. It now heads to the full Senate, where Barr is expected to be confirmed. The practicing Catholic previously was Attorney General from 1991 until 1993. People in crisis-ridden Venezuela are asking President Nicolas Maduro to accept humanitarian aid. The president has blocked access to the country, saying he and his people are not beggars. There are shipments of food and medicine from the United States waiting to be delivered. Also today, opposition leader Juan Guaido says he is hoping Pope Francis will come to Venezuela. The Holy Father says he's willing to mediate the conflict, but only if both sides agree. Venezuela's socialist government is in the midst of an economic and political crisis. Officials in the Philippines say Islamic militants are harboring a would-be suicide bomber. The Abu Sayyaf terror group, which is loyal to ISIS, is accused of plotting the attack at a Catholic cathedral last month that killed 23 people. The people in the majority Catholic country are worried about potential attacks in the future. British Prime Minister Theresa May makes a promise about the country's proposed exit from the European Union.
I'm going to deliver Brexit. I'm going to deliver it on time. That's what I'm going to do for the British public.
May was speaking after another round of negotiations with EU leaders in Brussels. She says the withdrawal will not be easy, but it will happen by the March 29th deadline. This week has been a historic one for Pope Francis after his trip to the United Arab Emirates. He celebrated the first ever papal mass in the Arabian Peninsula and signed a joint Muslim-Catholic declaration condemning all violence in the name of religion. Pope Francis' visit to Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, the cradle of Islam, would have been unthinkable just over a decade ago. The Holy Father said the trip marked a new page in the history of dialogue between Christianity and Islam. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joins us. Edward, you were on the ground reporting in the United Arab Emirates. What has been the impact of this trip?
Yes, well, the Catholic faithful were very happy about this visit. They were jubilant, and Bishop Paul Hinder, the Bishop of the region, said they were teary-eyed. He called it a special grace that the Pope went there on this unprecedented the first time a Pope has been to the Arab Peninsula. The faithful were also happy, I think, about the calls for mutual respect and tolerance in a region where that's been lacking particularly. The UAE government was delighted with it. We haven't heard much from Muslim leaders about what they think yet, and also Bishop Hinder said that we need to wait. The tangible results cannot be seen yet, and the impact cannot be seen, and it's just a matter of time waiting to be seen how this call to action that the Pope made will be put into effect.
Now, there is some controversy over a passage in the statement signed by the Pope and the Grand Imam. What is sparking the debate?
Yes, well, this passage, Wyatt, relates to words which are the plurality and diversity of religions are willed by God. Now, critics say that this is not true, that it's perhaps even a heretical statement, because God, who is truth, cannot will all religions. He'll only will the one true religion, which we believe is the Catholic faith. So there are concerns about that. Apparently, the document was examined by the papal theologian, Father Giertic, who's a Dominican, but we understand that he didn't see the final draft of the document, so certain aspects of this document may have passed scrutiny or not passed scrutiny.
Interesting. Okay, we'll continue to see how that plays out. In the meantime, Pope Francis will visit Morocco in North Africa at the end of March. How did the historic trip to the UAE advance the Pope's outreach, do you think, to the Muslim world?
Well, it really set the stage, Wyatt, for this year. The Pope wants this year really to be an outreach to the Muslim world, because it's the 800th anniversary of the famous meeting between St. Francis of Assisi and the Sultan, going back to the 13th century. So he wants this really to be emblematic of that, reaching out to the Muslim world in terms of what he calls human fraternity. And I think he wants this visit to see that through. He also sees it very much as a pushback, I think, against what he calls a strong temptation to believe that there's a clash of civilizations between Islam and Christianity. And I think that's the driving force why he really wants this year to show that the two faiths or two religions can get along.
Always interesting to hear about all of the Pope's activities and where he's going to be traveling to next. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Coming up, New York's governor fights back on his pro-abortion legislation.
Va un po' col naso in su.
Pope Francis urges the faithful to be meek and humble. At his daily Mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father says walking around with our noses in the air as if we are superior to others will not bring anyone to Christ. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump uses his State of the Union speech to reject calls to adopt socialism in the U.S. and issues a warning about its dangers. The president mentioned Venezuela and the socialist policies of Nicolas Maduro as being responsible for that country's plunge from wealth to poverty. Romina Boccia joins me now. Romina is a leading economic expert and director of the Grover Herman Center for the Federal Budget at the Heritage Foundation. Romina, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Socialist policies have been getting a lot of attention these days, with politicians like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talking about it. Others, they're millennials who simply say they agree with certain socialist concepts like single-payer health care and free public education. Do you see this as a national movement, or is this just a passing fad?
I hope it's a passing fad, because we are seeing that a majority of Democrats in the latest polls look favorably upon socialism, and I hope that it's because they don't know what it means, because if you look at Eastern Germany, if you look at Russia, Cuba, and Venezuela today, you can see that all that socialism brings is death and destruction. And I think that this reaction to socialism, people tend to think of, oh, we want to be more like Sweden or Denmark, which has a very generous welfare state, but that's not socialism. But these are both capitalist countries that just have very large welfare states, which is very different from socialism, where the government owns all of the factories, hospitals, all the means of production.
Because I think they try to use the term democratic socialist, so maybe you can help me understand the difference here, because you're commenting on socialism and how socialism actually works. What is it for people who don't really understand it?
You know, democratic socialism is an oxymoron. That doesn't mean anything, because because socialism is ultimately totalitarianism. Socialism is closer to fascism than democracy. What they might mean, perhaps, I'm not sure, could be that we as a democracy decide to adopt socialism, but once you're in socialism, you're no longer a democracy. There's no freedom of speech, there's no freedom of religion, there's no freedom to exchange with others on a voluntary basis. Socialism truly means the government controls all of the production. It decides what gets bought, what gets sold, what gets produced, and this is why socialist countries end up in poverty, because these governments, even if they're well-intentioned, which they aren't always, if you look at Venezuela, for example, they just don't have the necessary information that the market system brings about naturally.
Well, certainly socialism as a concept continues to be emerging in campaign issues, especially as we head towards 2020. Are socialist policies something that just divides Democrats, or are there Republicans that are also having to sort of fight this battle as well?
Well, what we're seeing is on both sides of the aisle that both Democrats and Republicans are struggling with the fact that there are some Americans who are feeling left behind, even in this very strong economy. So we should ask, what are the barriers in place that keep Americans from moving to where the jobs are, that keep people from starting their own businesses? And there are a lot of regulations that need to be taken down. It's something that the Trump administration, they have made a lot of progress in making America more competitive with tax reform, with regulatory reforms. That's the direction we need to go to allow more Americans to participate and to benefit from the growth in this strong economy. But socialism is the wrong way to go. It will make us poorer because capitalism is the only just and ethical means of organizing production, and it also happens to be the most effective system for lifting people out of poverty.
And like you say, all you have to do is look at Venezuela as an example. Romina Boccia, director of the Grover Herman Center for the Federal Budget at the Heritage Foundation, thanks so much for talking with us about it.
Thanks for having me.
In his State of the Union address Tuesday night, President Trump criticized New York's new abortion law. The state's governor is striking back. In an op-ed yesterday in the New York Times, Andrew Cuomo says conservatives are attacking a woman's constitutional rights, and the president's call to ban late-term abortion would roll back decades of court rulings protecting the procedure. Cuomo signed a provision last month allowing some abortions through the 9th month of pregnancy. Republican lawmakers in Indiana are seeking to outlaw a second trimester abortion procedure. The proposal says doctors who perform dismemberment abortion face several years in prison. Several other states who tried to ban the procedure have been blocked by the courts. Another pro-life measure is being considered in Mississippi. Lawmakers there are trying to ban abortion once a fetal heartbeat is detected, sometimes after 6 weeks. The Republican governor says he will sign the measure if it passes the House and Senate. Abortion supporters are expected to file a legal challenge. Up next, the Holy Father tells us what he's praying for this month, and analysis of the political chaos in Virginia.
No podemos ignorar que hoy hay esclavitud en el mundo.
Pope Francis releases his prayer intention for this month, saying there is a lot of slavery in the world today. He asked the faithful to pray for victims of human trafficking, forced prostitution, and violence. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump weighs in on the political turmoil facing Virginia's top 3 elected officials and makes a prediction. The president tweeted today, Democrats at the top are killing the great state of Virginia. If the 3 failing polls were Republicans, far stronger action would be taken. Virginia will come back home Republican in 2020. Elizabeth Harrington, senior writer for the Washington Free Beacon, joins me now. Elizabeth, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Do you agree with the president, at least in this notion, that you think there's a double standard when it comes to accountability between Democrats and Republicans on zero tolerance, like racism and sexual misconduct?
Absolutely. I think the drumbeat would be a lot louder if it was a Republican or multiple Republicans that were engulfed in a scandal, the scandals like we've seen. But I think what we're seeing here you have Ralph Northam, who accused Ed Gillespie of racism. That was his closing argument. Now he has this scandal, and you have to go down the third line in succession, past the third line in succession, to find a Democrat who is not accused of either racism or sexual assault.
Yeah, like you say, pressure is mounting on all three men, Governor Ralph Northam, Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, and Attorney General Mark Herring. How do you think this is going to play out?
Well, so far it seems that Ralph Northam's strategy is, if I'm going down, I'm taking all of you with me. And everyone's throwing mud at each other. There's a scandal engulfed with everyone in the Democratic Party and the leadership. And I think President Trump is right in saying that Republicans do have an opportunity here. This is a state that's been trending blue for the past election cycles. But here we have, how do you regain the trust of voters? Like I said, when you ran, your closing argument was that the Republicans were racist. And then this blackface and KKK photo comes out. How do you regain voters that voted for you thinking you were a moderate Democrat when you come out in support of post-birth abortion? How do you regain that trust? I think voters will be thinking twice about what Democrats run on and what actually is the case.
And like I said, there's plenty of mudslinging in the meantime. Are you surprised that we're now sort of coming up on a week after the governor's yearbook photo was released, and he's still refusing to step down, even with all the pressure from other Democrats?
It's incredible, and I think there would be a lot more pressure if it was a Republican, because now he's kind of muddied the waters, and everyone else has their own scandal, and it's easy for Democrats to call on Northam to resign when they think a Democrat will replace him in Justin Fairfax. But if he's not able to take the reins because of this sexual assault allegation, which this entire scandal to me seems to be the Kavanaugh affair coming back to hurt the Democrats. Everything they accused Kavanaugh of doing with credible allegations, what they said of Dr. Ford, is happening to Justin Fairfax. And right away, we know it's even more credible because Dr. Tyson, names a time, date, and place, and Mr. Fairfax says he was there. So right there, you have that allegation turned on its head, and you have all of the character assassination against Justice Kavanaugh about the yearbooks, when it was really, there was nothing to be found in the yearbooks. And here we have Democrats with lots of problems in their yearbooks of abhorrent racist behavior in their youth.
And we'll be watching to see how it all plays out, might result in just 3 dominoes coming down in Richmond. So Elizabeth Harrington, senior writer for the Washington Free Beacon, thanks so much for your analysis about it.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, our friends at EWTN Pro-Life Weekly celebrate 100 episodes. EWTN Chairman and CEO Michael Warsaw discusses the impact the team has made on the pro-life cause.
It's our responsibility to be that voice, on a global basis. You know, I think Mother Angelica would be very, very proud of this show. I think she'd be very, very proud of what you've been able to accomplish with the show.
You can see more of Catherine Hadrow's interview tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on EWTN. And we certainly send our heartfelt thanks to Catherine for all of her hard work in the pro-life movement, and say congrats to Pro-Life Weekly team for 100 episodes. And with that, we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.